Dr. Henry is amazing a lady on the subway with his remarkable powers of observation. A second train appears on the tracks and collides with his while he is ready to receive a date, resulting in a terrible accident. Every one of the travelers are dead or gravely hurt. Henry is impaled through a metal rod. He reaches for his fallen pocket watch. Unfortunately, at that time, he passes away. His tale started 200 years ago, when Henry worked as a doctor for a slave ship and already had the watch. A black man had a minor fever and Henry was convinced he merely needed to rest, although the owners were feared the man had cholera and wanted to throw him overboard. Henry sought to defend the slave, so the owners shot him and tossed his body into the sea. Something happened that night that kept him alive, and now Henry is immortal. Whenever Henry dies, his body appears naked in the ocean, which is happening now following the train catastrophe. Everyone in the park stares at him and the cops arrest him for exposure. After he's liberated, he travels to his abode in an antique shop and adds the latest incident to his diary, on which he keeps track of every time he dies. Meanwhile, Detective Jo is sent to investigate the collision and she finds Henry's watch. The cops search every automobile and find no survivors. The bodies are sent to the NYC Medical Examiner's office, where Henry works as a pathologist. He is working on opening the train driver when Jo arrives to ask for an update. With his observation skills, he can tell that Jo is a widow and has a drinking problem. Once he finishes the examination, he concludes that the driver was poisoned. At that moment, the phone rings and Henry hears a mystery man saying he saw him survive the train disaster, yet the guy hangs up before Henry can ask for his identification. Moments later, Jo checks the station's security cameras and sees Henry getting aboard the train. The next day, Henry arrives to work and finds an anonymous envelope containing a picture of him and his late wife Abigail in 1955. She always assumed that Henry was chosen to be immortal for a larger reason. The envelope also holds a newspaper covering the subway disaster and a note, so Henry concludes that the mysterious caller caused the disaster to proving he's immortal. Afterward, Henry takes a blood sample from the dead driver and takes it home. His adopted son Abe learns his secret and injects him with the poisoned blood. Henry dies and appears in the river as usual, but now he understands that the poison is aconite. When he tries to return home, he finds Jo and the cops waiting for him. They transport him to the station for interrogation and Jo shows him the watch. Henry easily changes the subject and tells them about the aconite. He points out that he can't be the killer because he's warning them about the toxin and that they don't have enough evidence to hold him, therefore he leaves. Later at the lab, Henry analyzes the body again until he notices the bruise left by the poison injection and a fingerprint. He takes this print to the police station and they learn it belongs to a man named Hans. Jo and Henry went to Hans' residence and see a dead rat on the ground. Seeing it as a hint, Henry searches the backyard and finds a greenhouse filled with the aconite plant. Then they check the garage, where they uncover a lab and the poison. At that instant, Hans appears and Jo tries to arrest him. Then he pours a tumbler of poison at her and escapes in his car. The aconite is aching Jo's hand and trying to enter into her veins, so Henry lights it on fire to neutralize it. Soon a police team arrives with further information. Hans' wife perished in a subway crash caused by the same driver he poisoned for retribution. This confuses Henry because that means Hans isn't the mysterious caller. A short inspection of the lab finds that 2 liters of poison are missing and there are traces of ethanol. Seeing some drawings of the Grand Central Station on Hans' notes, Henry concludes he's made the toxin water soluble to create bulk dyeing in the station where his wife died. The team hurries to Grand Central and Henry theorizes that Hans will be on the roof to put the poison in the air conditioning. Unfortunately, Hans sees them first and shoots Jo down. Henry rushes to battle Hans only to get shot in the scuffle. After Hans turns around, Henry tackles him and they both tumble from the roof, dying as they land on a car. Sometime later, Jo wakes up in the hospital with Henry beside her bedside. She remembers witnessing him collapse, but he convinces her that's impossible and says Hans self-deleted. At that point, he gets a call from the strange man, who says he has the same curse as Henry and is looking for a way to terminate things for both of them. On his way out, Henry remembers how he met Abigail while fighting in a war and how he rescued Abe as a newborn from a concentration camp. One evening, a sobbing Vicky is in a cab while trying to phone someone to no avail. She tells the driver to stop at the bridge and she gets out of the car to self-delete. The body terminates up in Henry's morgue and the cops suspect it was self-done. But Henry is confident it was murder since of the angle of fracture and signs that demonstrate she was braced for the moment of collision. Jo takes this information to her supervisor Joanna, who doesn't feel it was murder and tells Jo to close the instance as self-deletion. However, Henry refuses to sign a report that goes against his medical knowledge. Vicky's parents show up to his office and say their kid was a happy person, so she couldn't have done this. Watching them makes Henry think of Abigail and how they raised Abe together. That night Henry goes to the bridge and climbs over the edge to investigate. He finds traces from Vicky's shoes and fingernails where she struggled. He also detects a hook and slips, but he clutches on just in time to prevent falling. When he climbs back on the bridge, he gets hit by a truck and dies again. The driver attempts checking on him, but the body is already gone. The next day they uncover new stuff under Vicky's nails, paint from under the bridge and skin flakes from an attacker she scratched. Henry also discovers a message on his desk from the mysterious man claiming he knows Henry died again. He takes the note to Abe. Someone notices the paper is quite old. Thanks to the new proof, Joe keeps investigating and finds out that Vicky had already signed in for a flight to Paris. She and Henry went to Vicky's college to chat to her lecturer James, who gives them an alibi without their asking. Because of this and other tiny clues Henry notices, they conclude Vicky had an affair with him and consider him a suspect. Henry grabs a pen to conduct a DNA test that matches the skin found under Vicky's nails. He and Joe go to see James' wife and she backs up his alibi. However, Henry pulls her out for lying and points at several clues around the house that prove she knows about the romance. The wife cracks and confesses James lied. Later at the station, Henry notices that James has a skin issue and discovers Vicky scratched him while they were doing the naughty, hence he isn't the murderer. The cops think it's a stretch and arrest James anyway. Meanwhile, Abe has done further research on the mail and discovered the crest on the paper is from a hotel. Henry realizes it originates from a hotel in Italy that doesn't exist anymore. He stayed at the place once while he sought to break up with Abigail because of his condition, but she didn't allow him. Later, Henry examines Vicky's body again and finds meat in her lips, meaning she bit her attacker. He's interrupted by Joe, who has found James dead in his office. The cops think he's self-deleted, but Henry searches the crime scene and with a few clues verifies James was also murdered. While the cops go after the wife, Henry meets a student whose name he observed on James' papers. The guy's hand is bandaged and Henry knows that's where Vicky bit him. It turns out he assisted James and Vicky with the paper they were writing, but they weren't going to add him to the credits, so he killed them for retribution. Using a knife, the student takes Henry hostage. It is observed by the cops on the security cameras. Joe and his colleague instantly encircle them and shot the student in the shoulder to force him to release Henry, ultimately closing the case. When Henry arrives home, he gets another call from his mystery stalker. The guy knows Henry is 200 and claims to be 2,000 years old. He also says his name is Adam. Sometime later, Henry finishes a full investigation on his list of deaths and discovers that various deaths may take longer to be reborn from. Abe becomes angry because he hates seeing Henry so determined to end his curse while he suffers from getting old. Therefore, they end up bickering. In the evening, Bill gets his bag taken and decides to pursue after the robber. He manages to tackle him and starts beating him up, only to then die of an apparent heart attack. The body makes it at the morgue and Henry is astonished to see that this 67-year-old has an outstanding physique for his age. However, his brain has many of ailments, as if he had an ancient brain in a young body. There's a strange liquid in his stomach and no other meals or drinks, so he concludes that's what killed him. Joe and Henry chat to Bill's kid, who said his dad changed dramatically after his wife died. He forgot his family and focused on physical fitness and partying. Bill was found in Chinatown, but he disliked that region, and in his briefcase they found a business card for some kind of healing clinic with a significant chunk of cash. The duo next explores Chinatown and follows a series of clues to hunt down the place where Bill died. There they observe a fancy lady who looks terribly out of place in this neighborhood. They pursue her to a sketchy door that has the identical sign they saw on the business card. When they get inside, they discover a pricey clinic named Eterna managed by Dr. Gardner, who explains Eterna is a supplement that helps folks feel young again. However, he refuses to give them a sample without a warrant. Henry notices that Gardner has had plastic surgery to make his nose longer and to feminize his jaw, which are odd choices and probably suggest he's trying to disguise his real face. Then he pretends to accidentally stumble into a patient to secretly steal her Eterna. Joe approaches Gardner for a business card to acquire his fingerprints. All this business reminded Henry of the 1900s when individuals sold false cures for TB. After running a bunch of various tests, Henry determines that Eterna employs inexpensive compounds to cut corners. Joe also undertakes research when learns that Gardner is using a phony name. He had no medical training, and he used to run a clinic in which many individuals died. They go to see Gardner at his house, where he's having a pool party. He explains he doesn't create Eterna, he just sells it, which Henry thinks because he doesn't have the training. While Gardner changes into fitting attire to leave with them, Henry meets one of the patients and notices she's having memory issues. Suddenly they hear Gardner scream and hurry to check on him, only to discover him slain by a stab wound. The damage is incredibly accurate and manufactured by a scalpel, which suggests the killer possesses medical training. Later at the morgue, Henry confirms that Gardner's brain was also being altered by Eterna. The substance is packed with prion from infected tissue, which suggests the patients are drinking human brains. Jo and Henry confront his co-worker Lucas, who confirms 12 bodies have disappeared from the morgue. Lucas discusses his routine from the last week to identify any weaknesses, and they quickly realize the only person with access to the bodies is the ambulance driver. The cops hurry to encircle the guy and find him with a body in the ambulance. During interrogation, the driver maintains he's making Eterna, but Henry doesn't believe him because he lacks the expertise and training. When the cops find the clinic's list of patients, Henry is astonished to see Abe on it. He hurries home to soothe him, and Abe explains he doesn't want to be young. He only concerns how Henry will handle without him. He didn't take Eterna since it was too suspicious, but he met the chemist who made it. He explains the chemist to the cops, and a search of her face in the system reveals she's the sister of a morgue employee and Gardner's girlfriend. Later, Abe sees the chemist takes the train and contacts Henry to tell him he'll follow her. The cops rush the station and Henry finds her first, so she explains she didn't know Eterna was hurting people. Gardner got it from her after he threatened to send her back to her home nation. It wasn't her decision to employ cheap components either. That was also Gardner. She feels heaps of shame and wants to self-delete, but Henry stops her and ends the case. At a nice party in a museum, Gloria insults most of the guests. When she walks down a corridor, she notices someone following her. Moments later, the police are scrutinizing her lifeless body. Jo is startled to find Lucas there instead of Henry. It reveals out Henry used to be friends with Gloria, and it saddens him to see her body arrive at his morgue. Since Gloria belongs to one of the most important families in the city, reporters are wondering about her death, and Lucas accidentally mentions to them that it was a murder. Soon the news appear on every paper, and Gloria's family is upset regarding this information leak. Henry takes the blame to defend Lucas, and he's yanked off the case. Jo still invites Henry to investigate with her, and they go to the museum, which makes him really uncomfortable since he used to come here with Abigail often. Following a sequence of clues, Henry retraces Gloria's footsteps. He concludes that she was shoved down the steps and then trying to crawl away. Checking the security cams confirms that there was someone with her. The man on the webcam is Lance, who was transported to the station for interrogation. He claimed he asked Gloria's blessing because he wants to marry her granddaughter, whose father Conrad didn't approve. Lance has Gloria's ring, but he didn't steal it. She gave it to him for the engagement. She told him to follow his heart, which sounds suspicious since generally she doesn't behave politely. Gloria had been acting strange, and Henry makes Jo ask Lance about the symptoms, which makes him think she had a stroke. However, he's off the case, so he can't check the body to confirm. He remembers meeting Gloria during a museum party and how she told him to marry Abigail before it was too late. Jo tries to communicate to Lance's fiancée and discovers how dysfunctional the family is. Gloria is described as callous, and rumors indicate she was intending to cut Conrad out of the will. Conrad's currently auctioning off Gloria's stuff, and Abe gets to attend thanks to owning the antique shop. He goes into Gloria's bathroom and takes a photo of all her meds, but none of these could have triggered a stroke. Later at the station, Henry sees Conrad, yells at Reese, and finds his hand is shaking, signaling he has epilepsy. Henry asks him what medicine he takes and confirms it's the sort of chemical that could have killed Gloria. The cops interview him, and Conrad confirms that Gloria already cut him out of the will. He has a motive, but the cops don't have proof to keep him in custody. When Henry returns to his lab, Lucas tells him he felt too horrible, so he sneaked into the funeral home and obtained a sample of Gloria's liver. Henry instantly studies it and confirms that Gloria was poisoned by the drug, but it was before the party. The only person Gloria was with during that time had been her nurse. At that moment, a cop presents a newspaper announcing that the nurse inherited Gloria's riches. While the cops interrogating the nurse, Jo and Henry hunt Gloria's room. Among the ashes in the fireplace, they uncover a charred letter and a missing champagne glass, despite Gloria not being a drinker. Henry calls the station to ask the nurse more questions and understands the food Gloria ate made the drugs act faster, therefore it was delivered to her later. Next, they inspect Gloria's car and find the drugs that killed her. Henry gathers the family and the officers to share his conclusions. Gloria had been terminally ill and took the drug to self-delete. However, the food she ate made it act faster than expected, so she dragged herself across the floor to die in front of an artwork made by an ex-lover of hers who also sent the burning letter. After the case is settled, Jo relates a story of her dead husband. In reply, Henry confesses that the museum made him uneasy because that's where he proposed to his dead wife. A few nights later, a fancy woman is leaving a hotel when she's abruptly attacked by the shadows. The next morning, Henry and Lucas are called to the station because the cops received a bleeding box. When Henry opens it, he finds a human heart inside. After analyzing the heart in his lab, Henry informs the cops that it belongs to a woman and was taken while she was still alive. They go through the recent missing ladies in the system and Henry discards them, utilizing his observation logic until he concludes the victim must have been a night worker. This reminds him of the time he investigated the crimes by Jack the Ripper, since he was the doctor in charge of studying the bodies back then. The group goes to the hotel where the lady regularly worked and Henry finds a blind spot where a criminal could drag a body without being seen. Nearby there's a meat plant and Henry realizes the victim has the same name as one of the ladies killed by Jack the Ripper, which suggests they're dealing with a copycat. By examining the factory, the cops locate the dead lady's body and Henry is astonished by all the exact specifics that match Jack's old misdeeds. At that moment, Henry gets a call from Adam, who knows the identifier of the body. Henry hears a siren on the phone, but also outside, which means Adam is nearby. He hurries outside to try to capture him, but only finds his abandoned phone. Later, Henry takes the phone to Abe, who explains it's a burner and can't be traced. They wonder if Adam is genuinely Jack the Ripper since he was never arrested. He can't discuss such a theory with the police, so he wants to track the weapon used for the murder. There was a chunk of the blade in the body and Henry identified it as a highly rare surgical blade. Abe gets in contact with another antique merchant who maybe had the blade and snatches her contact book. Unfortunately, it's in Japanese and he can't read it. Meanwhile, Henry takes a closer look at the body and discovers the perpetrator made a mistake. Instead of severing the victim's wrist like it really happened, the killer employed the shape that the newspapers erroneously described. This means the killer isn't Jack and has been looking at old news articles. Jo and Henry go to the library and notice that the last person who checked out the ancient newspaper utilized another name from the Ripper's case. A second name on the list has the same handwriting and is still in the library. The guy sees them gazing and instantly runs away, so the duo starts chasing him. The suspect drops his bag while Jo keeps on after him, but Henry pauses to look at it and discovers the blade. At that point, he gets a call from Adam, who is at the crime scene and tells Henry that he overlooked a detail. It seems the criminal is mimicking numerous famous killers and not just Jack. There's a black dahlia at the crime site and Henry also finds it in the suspect's notepad. Jo catches the guy and takes him to the station for interrogation. He explains he's an author of graphic books about demon stings inspire murderers, and it was all study. Some of his supporters are particularly intense and have been stalking him. Therefore, this man ran from Jo because he assumed she was another crazed fan. Judging by the remarks admirers put on his webpage concerning murder dreams, he thinks a fan is behind the murders. He is utilizing his comics as a guide. Henry and the cops check the comics and confirm the murder could have been copied from them. Soon another body is found at the park, and this murder is an exact replica of the famous Black Dahlia case. Inside the victim's mouth there's a bit of nylon, which means the next crime will match the Boston Strangler. There's a leaf near the body that doesn't come from any of the park vegetation. It only blooms in Brooklyn, so the cops search the comic webpage for supporters who live in that area. Following the message's IP, the police team smashes into a residence and arrests a teenager called Devin. During interrogation, Devin keeps being incredibly strange and haughty because he feels they don't have enough to charge him. The parents are yelling at Joanna, who reveals that certain shoes in Devin's residence match the footprints from the crime site. Before the parents go to get a lawyer, Henry tells them he has evidence of purchase from an antique shop. Ignoring Jo's scolding regarding stolen evidence, Henry goes to see the antique dealer nonetheless and gives her back her book. He tells her about the police probe, and in return the dealer tells him that Devin didn't buy the blade, his father did. When Henry exits the store, Devin's dad ambushes him and stabs his lungs. Afterward, the man enters the store and captures the antique trader. He starts strangling her but is interrupted by Henry, who is ready to fight even in that situation. After much of struggle, both men fall down the stairs and Henry is in astonishment, so the killer steps on his back. Then the man goes upstairs and is halted by Jo, who shoots him when he tries to get his gun out. In the basement, Henry is found by Adam, who doesn't want their mystery to be uncovered yet. He murders Henry by cutting his neck to make his body disappear. The next day, Jo finishes the case while dealing with the truth that she killed a person. Henry gets another call from Adam, who claims it's only a matter of time until Henry becomes a murderer too. Sometime later, a British Viscount named Colin Cavendish is getting ready to marry an American woman called Emily. However, he isn't comfortable with all the money his father-in-law Norman is wasting on the party. The next day, Colin is discovered dead in the middle of Central Park. Jo finds it unusual that a Viscount was walking at the park in the middle of the night and that he was slain but not robbed. Henry thinks the wounds on the body don't make any sense and recalls there is no Viscount Cavendish, which a cop confirms after ringing the British embassy. It suggests this individual is an imposter. Later at the lab, they discover Colin is blonde, but he colored his hair. This makes Henry remember all the times he plastered phony gray hairs on his head to pretend he was becoming older. His neighbors would still catch up and he was obliged to move to another city with his family. In the present, he sees little gold flakes in Colin's neck wound and some grit in his other injuries. The curve of his mouth also shows he's American. The incredibly precise and thorough stitching of his garments makes Henry realize they share a tailor. Jo and Henry go to see the tailor, who doesn't have any clues because Colin paid everything in cash. He tells them Colin got a wedding suit and the duo goes to the wedding registry next. While Jo talks to the employee Patricia, Henry spots a bike messenger with the similar leg scars as Colin. The man tells him the scarring occurs from riding a bike all day long and recognizes Colin from a picture. His real name was Dwight and he used to be a bike messenger too, but he disappeared a year ago. After some investigation, Jo tells Joanna what she's uncovered. Dwight grew raised in Oklahoma as an orphan and bounced around numerous foster homes because he came to New York and worked as a messenger but never made enough money to meet a woman like Emily, who was prosperous thanks to her father's company. When Emily arrives to the police station, they have to tell her the truth about her fiancé's identity. At the lab, Lucas finds a torn-up check in Dwight's pocket. He pulls together the pieces to learn it's for $1 million from Norman. Jo and Henry go to see Norman, who is walking with a slight limp, things he blames on playing golf. They ask him some asks and Norman accidentally mentions Dwight was from Oklahoma, which the cops haven't disclosed anyone. Henry discovers some fabric on the wall that belongs to Dwight's suit and concludes that he and Norman had a quarrel. In fact, Norman's golf club matches one of Dwight's injuries. Norman is hauled to the station and his lawyer gives the cops a written statement. It says that Norman did hit Dwight with a golf club at home but didn't stab him later in the park. Apparently, Dwight confessed all to Norman and planned to tell Emily too, wanting to go away with her if she'd still have him. Norman also has an alibi for the period of death. Later, Henry takes another look at Dwight's body and discovers that the wound from the golf club had been treated. Henry realizes someone must have been helping all along since a rural youngster from Oklahoma doesn't have the means to imitate a British lord. Looking at a catalog to find where he bought the pricey clothes, he sees a gold pen and theorizes that's the murder weapon. The cops investigate where Dwight acquired everything and here he was using Patricia's employee discount. The crew searches Patricia's flat and they find loads of how to etiquette books, a bloodstained cloth, and a photo of Dwight before his change. They theorize that Patricia killed Dwight because he fell in love with Emily for real instead than running away with Patricia and the fake money. Checking the security cameras reveals that Patricia was both training and dating Dwight. Patricia hasn't gone to work since the investigation started and now her face is on wanted signs all around the city. In the afternoon, Henry goes with Abe to the graveyard, then they see Emily at Dwight's funeral getting too close to her father's lawyer. Henry also sees Patricia sneaking around, so he and Abe follow her while calling Jo. Patricia is eventually arrested and is escorted to the police station, where she swears she's innocent. She confirms Dwight broke up with her and the night of the murder he was going to tell Emily the truth. Hearing about Central Park, Patricia reveals Dwight was killed on the spot where he proposed to Emily. The group heads to the park and does a small reenactment that proves Emily didn't have the strength to kill Dwight, not to mention she has an alibi. Someone must have killed Dwight to keep Emily around, so the cops decide to arrest her to set a trap. In the evening, Norman's lawyer goes to the park to search for the golden pen he buried after the murder to confirm the cops don't have it. The detectives surround him and immediately arrest him. It turns out the lawyer is in love with Emily and killed Dwight to keep her from running away with him. While giving Emily an update on the case, Henry and Jo assure Emily that Dwight truly loved her and tore up the check because he didn't want the money. Afterward, Henry takes a cab home only to discover that the driver is his mysterious stalker Adam. Minutes ago, Adam killed the real taxi driver and stole the car to trick Henry. He starts driving like a maniac through the city while pointing out that Henry doesn't believe he's immortal. To prove it, he uses a gun to self-delete and his body disappears. The vehicle loses control and falls into the river. Henry pushes all the doors and windows but fails to open them, so he ends up drowning. When he comes back to life, some cops see him swimming naked and arrest him. At the station, Joanna demands an explanation, so Henry says he's a sleepwalker. Joanna tells him being eccentric is fine, but this can't go on because it'll challenge his credibility. The other officers tease him for the incident, but Jo shows concern, which Henry ignores. At the lab, Lucas shows Henry the latest body, who happens to be the taxi taxi driver. There's only one wound indicating he was stabbed by a sword. Then Henry tells Abe what's happening and Abe scolds him for going after Adam alone. He wants Henry to ask Jo for help, but Henry remembers the time he trusted another one of his wives with his secret and she sent him to an asylum. Henry takes some swords from the antique shop to do some tests, but none of them match the wound. Soon the cops find the cab in the water and take it out to look for clues. The casing from Adam's shot is under the seat and a detective recognizes it as a bullet from an antique gun. Jo wants to get DNA from the scratches on the back seat, but Henry tells her the water must have washed it off. She also finds Henry's watch, so he pretends he just dropped it. That night Henry and Abe go to the river to look for the gun. When they finally see it floating in the water, Henry gets ready to jump to retrieve it, but they're interrupted by the police. Henry is taken to the station again and he tells Joanna that he was looking for clues, so he's allowed to leave. Jo checks on him and tells him he may need therapy, but she also offers an ear if he ever needs it. This makes him remember his time at the asylum and all the horrible treatments the doctors put him through. Henry decides to try therapy anyway. After some chatting, the therapist Lewis decides Henry needs more people he trusts and can talk to in times of need, since obviously being a loner has taken a toll on him. Meanwhile, the cops find the gun where Henry saw it last night. It's a very old model and registered in Brooklyn under the name Richard Smythe. They go to the address on the gun license and find the apartment empty except for a dead body. This is Richard, the owner of the apartment, and his body has been opened up. Jo calls Henry, who checks the body and explains this guy was autopsied while still alive. The cuts were done by a very exact blade, like a hunting knife. Getting suspicious, Henry rushes back to his office and checks his tool bag. It turns out his own hunting knife is covered in blood. Then Henry shares this with Abe, who concludes they must either leave the city or trust Jo with the secret. Meanwhile, Jo arrives at the lab and Lucas tells her that Henry has been acting weird. He also reveals that Richard's body was autopsied in Henry's style. Jo goes to the antique store and finds Henry packing to leave the city. She also sees him holding the bloodstained blade. Abe tells him to confess the truth, but Henry keeps thinking about his torture in the asylum. Henry is escorted to the police station and he informs Joanna and Jo a mended tale, indicating he has a psychotic stalker who thinks he's immortal. Since at the beginning it was merely anonymous calls, he felt they were just pranks, but finding the body made him realize it was a real crazy man. Henry was preparing to leaving town since the concept that would make the stalker stop. Jo points out that Henry was with the therapist at the time of the murder and Joanna feels he's innocent. Afterward, Henry and Lucas undertake a detailed autopsy of the body and detect a biting mark. Both victims were also recently vaccinated for hepatitis B. Jo checks the men's employment histories and discovers they worked in the same psychiatric facility. Henry and Jo attend the hospital and hear that both men departed their employment after a physical altercation with a patient. However, the hospital won't tell the cops which patient did it without a court order, but the files can be seen by a psychiatrist. Henry asks his therapist to help them and Lewis gets his hands on the patient's file. The guy's name is Clark and there are no birth records, although he's been routinely caught skinny dipping in the river. He's really violent, has attacked numerous staff, and has no fear of death or feeling of self-preservation. Clark is intended to be in counseling right now, so Jo runs to the security guard's office to lock down the building. Unfortunately, Clark sneaks out soon before the door is locked. Afterward, Joanna sends a bunch of cops with wanted posters to search the city for Clark. Henry walks home and hears really loud music. Instead of Abe, he finds Clark waiting for him in the basement. Clark kneels as he exposes a katana and asks Henry to end everything for him, but Henry refuses. At that point, Abe arrives home and Clark grabs for the sword to stop him, so Henry tackles Clark and they start fighting on the floor. After much of struggle and flinging each other against the furniture, Henry tries to grab a knife and stabs Clark, instantaneously killing him. This suggests he wasn't Adam. When the cops come to retrieve the body, they tell him he shouldn't feel bad because it was self-defense and he took out a serial killer, hence it was a righteous kill. Suddenly the phone rings and Henry gets a call from Adam, who explains Clark was a sociopath, so Henry accomplished a good deed. Adam had manipulated Clark to convince him that Henry could pass his immortality by killing him, and now Henry has finally experienced something new in his long life. When Adam encourages Henry to peek outdoors, it's revealed his identity is actually Lewis. Someone exits in a cab before Henry can react. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, leave a comment about your favorite movie, and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.